Integration and invitation. What changes? When you stop trying to heal and start relating. There is a quiet moment that comes for many people on the spiritual path, especially people who have been sincere for a long time. It often arrives after you have tried hard to be better. After you have read the books, learned the language, practiced the practices, and done your best to apply what you know. It arrives after you have grown enough to notice something important. You can spend years working on yourself and still feel like you are arguing with yourself inside. You can chase healing like a finish line and still feel anxious when life gets uncertain. You can talk beautifully about peace and still feel rushed, reactive, or ashamed when a wave rises. That moment can feel discouraging if you interpret it as failure. But if you interpret it correctly, it can be one of the most meaningful turning points of your life. Because it is often the moment when you realize that healing was never meant to be a project of self-fixing. Healing was meant to be a return to relationship. When you stop trying to heal by force and start relating to your inner life with steadiness and care, a very different kind of change begins to unfold. It is not dramatic in the way social media likes. It is not the kind of change you can always explain in a single sentence. It is deeper than that. It is the kind of change you notice in the way you move through ordinary days, in the way you recover after difficult moments, in the way you speak to yourself when you're tired, in the way you hold the ache of being human without making it mean you are broken. And the first change you usually notice is this: less urgency. Urgency is one of the most exhausting emotions there is, because it keeps your nervous system on a constant edge. It makes everything feel like it has to be resolved right now. It makes you feel late, behind, endangered, or about to lose something. It makes you interpret discomfort as emergency. When you begin to relate to emotions as messengers instead of problems, and when you begin to create safety before you seek insight, urgency starts to soften. Not because you no longer care, but because you no longer believe that the feeling is proof you are in danger. That shift is not small. It changes the entire tone of your inner world. When urgency softens, the second change becomes possible: fewer spirals. Spirals are not caused by feelings alone. Spirals are caused by the combination of feeling plus fear. A feeling rises, and then the mind interprets it as a sign of something terrible. You think, this will never end. You think, I'm back here again. You think, I can't handle this. You think, I'm not okay. And the body hears those thoughts as danger signals. The body tightens more. The feeling intensifies. The mind searches harder for certainty. You go deeper into analysis, judgment, or catastrophizing. The spiral continues. But when you learn to stay with feelings without panic, you interrupt the fear that fuels the spiral. You don't have to stop the feeling. You simply stop turning it into a crisis. You become able to say, this is a wave. I can be here with it. That one shift often reduces the momentum that carries you into the loop. This is also where you begin to feel something many people don't realize they are allowed to feel: trust in timing. Trust in timing is not passivity. It is not resignation. It is not spiritual denial. It is the understanding that your inner life has rhythms, and those rhythms cannot always be hurried. It is the willingness to let a process unfold without treating every hard day as proof that you are failing. It is the recognition that integration takes time, because the nervous system learns through repetition, not through one perfect insight. Many people on a spiritual path are actually very impatient with themselves. They don't call it impatience, they call it devotion. But the energy is impatience. The energy is, I should be further along by now. The energy is, I shouldn't still have this trigger. The energy is, I should be more peaceful than this. When you begin to relate instead of fix, you replace impatience with timing. you start to understand that you are not a machine you can optimize. You are a living being. You are a nervous system, a heart, a mind, a history, a soul. And living beings learn safety slowly. They learn it through being met, again and again, with steadiness. That understanding brings a fourth shift, one that is both tender and powerful, deeper compassion for yourself. This is where compassion becomes something real, not just a spiritual idea. Because many people think compassion means being gentle when they're calm, or being kind to themselves when they've had a good day. But true compassion is what you offer yourself when you are not doing well. True compassion is how you respond when you're triggered, messy, tired, reactive, ashamed, overwhelmed, or numb. When you stop trying to fix yourself, you stop using shame as a motivational tool. You stop treating your pain as an inconvenience. You stop speaking to yourself like an enemy. You start speaking to yourself like someone you love. Not in a fake way, not in an overly sweet way, but in a grounded way. Of course this is hard. Of course you're feeling this. Come here, I'm with you. Tara Brach, in her teaching, often points toward the idea that healing begins when we stop abandoning ourselves. That abandonment can be subtle. It can sound like criticism. It can look like pushing through. It can show up as forcing positivity. But when you replace abandonment with presence, compassion becomes the natural outcome. You are simply doing what any wise person would do, staying close to what is hurting without making it wrong. And this is where spiritual maturity begins to look different than many people were taught. A lot of us grew up with an idea of spiritual maturity that sounded like transcendence. It sounded like being above things, being unbothered, being serene, always forgiving, always wise, always calm. And while there are people who embody something like that, most of the time what we're actually seeing is either a moment of genuine groundedness or a performance of groundedness. When you are on the inside of your own life, you don't need performance, you need truth. So let's offer a new definition, one that is more honest and more helpful. Spiritual maturity is steadiness, not transcendence. Steadiness doesn't mean you never feel strong emotions. Steadiness means you don't abandon yourself when you do. Steadiness means you can be with discomfort without rushing to make it disappear. Steadiness means you can hold two things at once, the reality of your feelings and the wider reality of your life. Steadiness means you can stay present through uncertainty, and you can listen for wisdom without demanding it arrive on your schedule. This kind of steadiness is not flashy, but it is transformative. It is what makes a person safe to be around. It is what makes a life feel inhabitable. It is what turns spirituality from an idea into a lived presence. Stephen Porges' work on the nervous system helps us see why this matters in such a practical way. When your system can perceive safety, you become more flexible, more relational, more able to think clearly. You become more capable of repair after conflict. You become less likely to interpret everything as threat. In other words, regulation is not just about feeling better. It shapes who you become. And that's why the shift from fixing to relating is so powerful. Because fixing tends to keep you in a subtle war with your inner life. It keeps you chasing a version of yourself that never feels like the present you. Relating brings you into contact with the present you. It makes the present you livable. And from that place, real growth happens. Not from force, but from honesty. As you live this, you begin to notice something else. Your emotional life becomes less mysterious. Not because you have no feelings, but because you are no longer afraid of them. You become able to recognize the early cues of activation. You become able to pause before reacting. You become able to say, I'm getting tight. Something in me is bracing. Let me come back to the body. You become able to choose your next step with more clarity. You may also notice that your relationships change. When you are less urgent inside, you are less urgent with other people. You become less likely to demand reassurance, less likely to chase or withdraw, less likely to make someone else responsible for regulating you. You become more able to say what you feel without making it a crisis. You become more able to hear someone else's experience without collapsing into defensiveness. That is not just emotional growth, it is spiritual fruit. It is what compassion looks like in real life. You may notice that you become more resilient with the world's uncertainty. The news can still be painful. Politics can still be frightening. Life can still be unpredictable. But you don't have to treat every stressor as proof you are unsafe. You can hold the truth of the world while still remembering the ground under your feet. You can care deeply without being consumed. And you may notice something almost sacred. You begin to feel more at home in your own body. Many spiritually minded people have complicated relationships with their bodies. Some were taught to mistrust the body. Some were taught the body is sinful or distracting. Some were taught to override the body's needs in the name of discipline. Others were never taught to listen. So the body became a place of confusion, tension, or shame. But when you practice companionship, the body begins to feel like a place you can live. Not perfectly, not always comfortably, but honestly. You become less likely to leave yourself. You become more likely to inhabit yourself. That is integration. Integration is not the absence of struggle. It is the presence of relationship. It is the felt sense that no part of you is exiled. It is the inner experience of being a whole person, messy, tender, strong, uncertain, alive, without needing to split into spiritual parts and unspiritual parts. And because integration happens through repetition, it is important to say this clearly, in a way that does not pressure you. Healing often happens in revisits. You don't do this once and graduate. You return to it. You return when you forget. You return when you have a hard day. You return when your mind gets loud at night. You return when life surprises you. You return when you're triggered and you want to run. You return when you want to fix. You return when you want to be above it. You return, and each return is not a failure. Each return is practice. Each return is training. Each return is a new experience of staying with yourself. So if this helped, sit with it again later. Let it be something you revisit. Let it be something you don't rush. Let it be something that becomes familiar in your body, not just in your mind. And if this resonated, if you can think of someone who is sincerely trying to be peaceful but still feels overwhelmed, share it with them. Not as advice, not as a correction, but as companionship. Because sometimes the most healing thing we can offer another person is not a solution. It's a gentle reminder. You're not broken. You're not behind. Your body is learning, and you don't have to do it alone. If this information was helpful for you, I ask for you to like, subscribe, and comment on this video. And until later, love, peace, and release.